Forget that France is without a government. Forget illiberal wins, superpower tensions, wars abroad. On Saturday, the City of Light welcomes the world for the grand reopening of Notre-Dame Cathedral. Oh, how the planet has changed in 5 years since Our Lady of Paris was gutted by fire. The presence at the grand reopening of U.S. President-elect Donald Trump can attest to that. Further proof that Notre-Dame means so much to so many the world over. What does it mean? A place of worship, an attraction in the bigger tourist playground that is Paris, a relic of history, a measure of timelessness. What does it mean today? And what's the current evolution of that meaning? Today in the France 24 debate, we'll always have Notre-Dame. And joining us, Ariel Veil is district mayor for the center of Paris. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Jean-Yves Riocreux is Bishop Emeritus. You were a rector in a previous life of Notre-Dame Cathedral. Thanks for being with us.
Yes, it was.
Journalist Agnès Poirier, London correspondent for French magazine L'Express, the author of Notre-Dame, the Soul of France, which takes us from 1163 and the first cornerstone that's put down all the way to 2019 and that fire. Now, back in 2019, we were broadcasting on the day after, and we had the pleasure of having a local from the neighborhood, Brian Spence, owner of the Abbey Bookshop in the heart of the Latin Quarter. Thanks for being with us 5 years later.
Yes, 5 years later. Much sooner than I would have expected.
That's right. Well, there you go. By the way, you can always listen, like, and subscribe to the podcast version of the show wherever podcasts are streamed. The blaze broke out under the eaves during renovations that, well, at the time suddenly seemed trivial compared to, as Brian was saying, the task at hand. Luc Schrago takes us back.
Right from the get-go in 2019, Notre-Dame's reconstruction got off to a bumpy start. Work halted after a complaint accusing French authorities of minimizing the risks from lead contamination. The fire had melted more than 450 tons of the soft metal, which evaporated and then settled back as toxic dust. Anyone near the site had to wear protective suits, complicating life for those present. Winter that year would see further halts due to storms, but the arrival of COVID the next year slammed on the brakes hard. The then head of reconstruction efforts put on a brave face for France 24's camera.
It's an extremely ambitious program. We're keeping the target for reopening the cathedral for services in 2024.
At the end of 2020, the race was on. The huge scaffold for the roof's restoration the previous year came down, and vast oak ribs reinforcing the vaults that had been in danger of collapse went up. Every part of the program was a technical and human challenge.
Our people are underneath. There's always a risk, a little wind or something, but everything's going well. We're very happy.
With the cathedral out of imminent danger, the real restoration phase could begin. Original colours long hidden under centuries of dust once again shone forth.
We're really like the painters when they did the original work. We're in the same place, at the same height. It's such a nice feeling to have.
Notre-Dame's forest, the wooden lattice under the roof, saw 2,000 oak trees from all over France used in its reconstruction. A gem of medieval architecture, it was completed in January this year. A month later saw the cathedral's new spire revealed. 96 meters in height, remade in the image of the 19th century architect Viollet-le-Duc's original. A brand new symbolic rooster took its place atop the edifice. And 2 years after its cleaning, June saw the first notes played on the grand organ, when the hammers finally fell still.
It's a really deep silence. It's a huge privilege to have a silence of such quality like this. We'll never have it ever again.
After its breath and its light, Notre-Dame once more found its voice. The 8 bells of the North Belfry were blessed before returning to their perches above Paris's roofs.
It's also Our Lady of Humanity. It's in a way the whole world's cathedral.
A cathedral that 5 years after closing its doors to that world now opens them wide once more.
Bishop Riocreux, you heard there Brian Spence saying 5 years ago he didn't believe that it could be done so quickly. Did you share that sentiment at the time?
No, it was announced that it would be in 5 years, and I thought at the time it was possible because I knew that there were the workers for that, and there was the decision to make it in 5 years' time.
Is it the same Notre-Dame?
Oh, it's the same since it was built in the 12th century. I celebrate Mass many times in this very special place. But there is new, and as we can see now, the baptistry, the altar, and it's the light which is present now because it was very, very dark in the past. But also there are two signs. The sign is a very symbol of the cross, which was not destroyed, and the statue of the Virgin Mary, which is at the same time as we can see now on the screen.
Ariel Vell, what is the meaning for you of this restoration?
You know, I also thought back at the time, I said that we could do something in 5 years. We could reopen it in 5 years. I wasn't among those that made fun of this promise, but I also said that the cathedral would still be worked on, and it is still. You know, it won't be over. There's still work going on, and there will be work surrounding it. But for me, this making good on the promise of at least reopening it to a wide audience means that when we set ourselves a goal, that we can meet it. And, you know, I think for the outside public, it's quite hard to understand, but you've had a tremendous number of people working in this cathedral. I'm not even thinking the companions, the different craftsmanship, from, you know, up to 2,000 people, but the government, the city, the region, all these entities which we struggle sometimes to make work in the same direction, they've all met on that project. And in a way, it's a little bit symbolic, and it's a bit an echo of what happened last summer with the Olympics. We also had an amazing success. We had no other choice but to make good on that promise. And there, too, we saw everyone working in the same direction. So perhaps we can follow the same methodology for our government now.
Perhaps. Agnès Poirier, people were surprised this summer during the Olympics that it went well, because in France we're used to sometimes things not going well, or at least predicted that way. And Notre-Dame is a second example of it. You agree with Ariel?
Yeah, well, especially, I mean, Notre-Dame, I think, you know, it happened because there was the political will. I mean, the French are not going to be grateful to President Macron, but without that will and the fact that he appointed a five-star general, the late Jean-Louis Georgelin, whom we saw in your reportage and who died last summer in an accident, a hiking accident, I think, you know, he made it happen. And then, of course, the artisans. We had the skills at home. We're talking about 2,000 craftspeople plus all around the world. You know, I did cover the reconstruction of Notre-Dame for a BBC documentary, and I got to meet American carpenters, Scottish, Argentinian carpenters who left everything behind to lend a hand to their...
Private citizens who donated their oak trees.
Well, of course, that as well. And the amazing generosity of not only very rich people, but actually people who'd sent... And I saw the envelopes with, you know, a few coins, a few euro coins. So all in all, it's true there is a team's effort. The artisans were there, the skills were there, but then there was a political will. Without political will, if we had left it to French parliamentarians, we would, you know, they would still be debating its fate, and Notre Dame would have collapsed.
Yeah, this sort of collective will. Brian Spence, when the cathedral was built, in those days you didn't have one grand architect. You had ordinary citizens who would go and help out for a day or two and then go back to their fields. And And there was also this spirit. There's something about Notre-Dame, isn't there?
But it did take 107 years to build. And by that point, they still didn't have a steeple. That took a few hundred more years as well. And I think the extraordinary thing about it is the speed at which this collective action took place. It was a political will, but also, of course, the financial support that was absolutely necessary. And that it was
because they've been struggling to get that financial support before. And now the money came.
Well, the cathedral had to close. And for many, that was just unacceptable. And that it was a major priority, and as well as a challenge, to get it done quickly. Because there was a pain to seeing that cathedral in distress that people lived every day when they walked by it.
People, and Jean-Yves Ricreux, are you surprised at how much, and you heard Agnès describe the example of it, how much the rest of the world feels invested in Notre-Dame? Why is that?
No, because it was world emotion. And there was a film about after the fire realized by Jean-Jacques Hano, who present the
filmmaker made the
film about the fire. And we at one time they present the television of all the world, from China to the States, and showing that everybody was moved by that. And in the weeks which follow the fire, many donation from wealthy people from France, but from all over the world. We almost 300,000 donation, and from 100 countries. That means that it's like in the past, everybody was part of the building, and we can say now everybody, not only in Paris and in France, but from all over the world, were part of the rebuilding of Notre-Dame.
Part of the rebuilding, there's that old line by the 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche: what are all these churches now if they're not the tombs and sepulchres of God? And we're living in France, which has a staunchly secular tradition. Is Notre-Dame a religious edifice?
Oh, certainly, because it was the cathedral at the time of the building in the 12th century, at the time of King Louis VII, and the bishop called Maurice de Sully, who starts the building. And in the island of the city, there was many churches. There was already a cathedral called St. John the Baptist, but it was too small, so they decided to build this big cathedral, like in many cities of France and Europe. And it's a religious place since this time. And as rector, I can see how many people came to visit a monument, but more than that, to discover that it's a religious place for the prayer every day. Every day there are prayer and masses, and we can say also many conversion, like Paul Colodel, the very famous
French thinker and writer
in the 19th century.
Ariel Vell, what does Notre-Dame mean for you personally?
Yeah, I'm smiling because I'm thinking that probably it's lost on your audience all over the world. I think no one understands the French league system, where Notre-Dame is actually both a religious and a secular monument. It belongs to everyone. And I think it's hard to understand for everyone, but I don't know if people realize that the actual building belongs to the state, but the church is actually managed, the cathedral is managed by the church. So the tension actually was felt. You can see the president now on his images. The president very much wanted to speak inside, so he had to organize a visit last week. I was there when he spoke to the artisans. But on Saturday night, it will be very clear who stands where. The president will speak outside the cathedral, and then the archbishop will speak inside. So that's the French recipe. But as Brian said, there was a lot of money. It was close to 1 billion money raised in the emotion of the fire. And I think that's one of the recipes for building fast. To me, Notre-Dame was always a dear monument. I walked by Notre-Dame, ever since I can remember as a child. And I think that it's pretty much the same for all Parisians. And we found out it was the same also for a lot of people around the world. I think the Eiffel Tower had come to epitomize maybe Paris, but it's only a century old or slightly over that, when Notre-Dame is almost a millenary old. So I think we've realized that it's probably the most famous monument in the world, arguably.
Agnès Poirier, working on the book, working on the documentary, did you see Notre-Dame in a different light?
Well, I agree with what's been said, but it's much more than a church, because it's been with us for more than 850 years. So it represents different things to different people, but it's, the Gothic symphony at its purest. It is...
Are people drawn to it because it's old, because it's 8 centuries old?
Not only because, for instance, it's symbolic, but it says so much. When you're driving and you're on your sat-nav and you say, I'm driving to Paris, well, Notre-Dame is kilometer 0. So by default, your car is going to take you there.
And that says a lot in a country that's very centralized.
Yes, completely. But also, when I search the history of Notre-Dame, I was so surprised by how it was financed. Unlike other Gothic cathedrals of the time, it's not so much the aristocracy or the king that paid for its construction. Maurice de Sully, who was the son of farmers, actually used all the revenues he could get, not for himself, but for the construction. The bourgeois of Paris paid into it. We were at, and it was an economic boom at the time, so the bourgeois of Paris were getting richer, paid into the construction. The prostitutes of Paris paid for its construction, and the farmers too. So it is the first people's palace we've ever had. It was the first covered public space, also the first museum you could visit because there were so many art objects. And during the French Revolution, it was where the French revolutionaries, strangely, took all their celebrations. When they abolished privileges, at dawn they flocked to Notre-Dame because for them, Providence could only be on their side. So it's a sort of synthesis of French history. It's also where we celebrate our victories, but also our defeats, where we mourn our defeats. And just one last example, after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, well, Notre-Dame rang.
We're going to have the 10th anniversary.
For the cartoonists who were anti-clerical, because Notre-Dame is everybody's church, everybody's monument. It accepts everyone.
Yeah, the Notre-Dame, which, as Agnès says, has meant different things to different people. It got an image makeover in the 19th century, not just when architect Eugène Viollet-le-Duc included a new spire in the renovations that started in 1843, but with, for instance, Victor Hugo's great Romantic era novel, a novel taken up by Hollywood as early as 1923 when Lon Chaney played the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Many other versions on the big screen would follow. The 1939 version with Charles Lawton, the 1956 version starring Anthony Quinn as the Hunchback and Gina Lollobrigida as Merelda. It means different things to different peoples. It also means different things through the ages, Brian Spence.
What can I say? A temple of religion, but at the same time, it was a cultural focus for the nation, has been from the beginning, that other activities would take place within the cathedral, encounters, business meetings, festivals would take place on a regular basis. And these were the locus of public participation in public life. In other words, there on the Ile de la Cité, you had the seat of government with the royal throne. You had the law courts, you had the Hôtel Dieu, which was the central hospital for Paris, and the cathedral. And where was the public allowed to go? To the cathedral. The Parvis was rather small in those days, much smaller than what it is now, that square right in front of the cathedral. So it was the focus for life, not just religious, but educational, pedagogical, and social. And I don't think that has changed.
It hasn't changed. Bishop Rilke, are you disappointed that the Pope is planning to go to Corsica, but not to come here to Paris?
He never said he will come to Paris.
Do you wish he had?
Oh no, I'm very happy, and I will be in Corsica for his visit, because he came in Strasbourg in 2014. He came in Marseille last year. It was a very good visit, and he never said he will come, even if he was invited, because he decided not to come for the reopening. But he will be in Corsica, which is France. Donc, we can rejoice of his visit in Corsica one week after the reopening of Notre-Dame of Paris.
The original plan was a reopening on the 5th anniversary of the fire in April. It's still coming in the 5 years on. It's after the Olympics, and for 1 week, Central Palace also getting an encore performance of the heavy lockdown and police presence experienced for the opening ceremonies last July of the Olympics.
Here, our customers are tourists, so for them too, it's hard when we tell them we'll be closed on Sunday, because some of them will head home on Monday. So we hope to compensate for it on Friday or maybe on Monday.
Ariel Vett, it's only for this time for a week, really, that we're feeling the lockdown in the heart of the capital. But your thoughts on all these world leaders showing up, and I guess we can talk about it. One in particular who's drawn attention, the president-elect of the United States.
Yes, absolutely. And the president-elect is causing actually more trouble than any of the other chiefs of state, security-wise. Well, no, I mean, saying security-wise, the protocol for his security is stronger than I think for anyone else, probably because of the threats and the attempts that have been made to his life previously. But I was with the head of police on Monday with a press conference, and I could sense the nervousness. Also, President-elect Trump was announced to be not coming and then coming again, so it was a little bit of a nervous breakdown on the police side. But yes, it's going to be pretty much lockdown. It is reminiscent of what happened over the summer, not so much for the Olympics per se, but for the opening ceremony, which we may recall was the first in history not happening in a closed stadium, but over a long stretch of the Seine River. And that was a big challenge. I think this is a little bit smaller and lasting a little bit a shorter span of time. But yes, it is going to be locked down. And as I'm speaking here, I encourage people not invited to the ceremony not to try and come to the islands. They won't be able to come, and a lot of circulation is going to be completely stopped over the weekend. So yes, it is tough, a little bit tough, but hey, how many times do we reopen the cathedral? As Brian said before, it has been there from the beginning. Paris wasn't much bigger than the island, the Ile de la Cité, as you mentioned, back 800 years ago. This was pretty much the center of Paris, but Paris didn't stretch for much more space than that. So it's always been there, and I think it's going to be an amazing ceremony.
Your caution when it comes to your travel advisory there. You're speaking in your capacity as mayor of the district. Let me ask you, in your capacity as a member of the opposition Socialist Party, is it good or bad that Donald Trump is coming to Paris?
I think there's much that could be said politically, and I would be happy to comment on his election. But for now, every chief of state is invited. There'll be kings, there'll be queens, and heads of state, and we're not choosing who gets to represent their countries. I think it's good overall that every country will be sending their highest ranking heads.
Agnès Poirier?
Well, I mean, Notre-Dame is beyond politics. So the Americans elected President Trump, and he wants to come. And Of course, he should be invited and greeted. Also, Jill Biden, I think, is coming. So both presidents will be represented. They could have chosen to send their ambassador. So it's an honor that they so chose to come. I think the Pope should have been coming. I think that was a political mistake on his part. And I don't think Corsica... what was the need for the Pope to go to Corsica? But I'm happy for the Corsicans. So we'll see. I'm quite unhappy also, or sad, that King Charles is not coming because he loves Gothic architecture. But of course, we know is of a certain age and also is ill. So we'll see. Actually, we don't know. He's coming for Britain. Perhaps Prince William's. We'll see.
And Prime Minister Trudeau is not coming for Canada.
What can I say? He's in a bit of political turmoil back home. And, I think that there are enough Canadians who are interested in Notre-Dame and that he should feel compelled to represent them the way that I think both American president-elect and president in place are representing the extraordinary fascination, the devotion that so many Americans of different faiths have for Notre-Dame, its history, and how it sort of incorporates the French spirit, the French tradition, maybe even more than the Eiffel Tower in the centuries that it's seen. Is there a more iconic building in Europe than Notre-Dame? And Americans, with their fascination for all things French, memories of Lafayette and so forth, of course they have an attachment to it, and they should be represented on the weekend.
I should explain why the Pope is coming to Corsica. He came for Mediterranean, for the islands which is near with Sardinia. The Pope visits very often these islands, Sardinia and Sicily, and he come for a meeting about the religious piety, and he will gather the bishop of the area, like last year when he came in Marseille. He gathered people from all around the Mediterranean Sea, because at the beginning of his pontificate, he said, I will go in places where no Pope went. He went, for example, in Papua New Guinea. I followed that a few weeks ago, and it was very powerful when he visited this country of Oceania. It was the first his visit in Oceania, but because he knew that Pope John Paul II came twice in Notre-Dame, because John Paul II came many times in France, he came twice. The Pope Benedict XVI came once in 2008. So the Pope is not coming, but he will be united with us. And if I can say a souvenir out there showing that the importance of Notre Dame around the world, we talk about the States. I want to talk about China, mainland China. When I was rector, I was very privileged to welcome the wife of the vice president, Hu Jintao, who became president of mainland China, and his wife wanted to visit Notre Dame, and I would come, and she was very much interested, and for me it was very one of the most interesting moments of my time as rector, because this Notre Dame is known all around the world and interests everybody, French and from different countries of the world, including mainland China.
And as Ariel was saying, this is at the heart of Paris, in what was, he would have been in the Middle Ages, not the district mayor, but the mayor of the whole city in those days. That's how small Paris was by comparison. It's a neighborhood that's gone through huge changes over 8th century. And it's also about to get greener. Aurore Dupuis has more. This is a clip from a longer report that she did.
In these images, provided by landscape architects, the Ile de la Cité will become greener, with less traffic and more vegetation. We'll be a long way from what the island looked like when Notre-Dame was first built in the 12th century.
This is a model of the Ile de la Cité and the forecourt of Notre-Dame in the Middle Ages.
The marshy island was once the only crossing point between the left bank and the right bank of Paris. One part was for the monarchy, the other for religious leaders. These were quiet, spacious areas, and packed in the centre, the people.
You have to imagine Paris where people travelled by horse, carts came from the countryside to bring in food. Tavern owners who sold drinks, particularly alcohol, were thriving. And there was also a lot of prostitution and thieves too.
Yeah, that little replica there of what Notre-Dame looked like in the Middle Ages, Ariel Vele, it certainly has changed. And as I said, it's about to change even more. It's going to get greener.
Absolutely, there's an amazing project that, in fact, has already started. When you look at the images over the weekend of the reopening of Notre-Dame, pay attention to the porch because the stones there are new, and they're the very beginning of the project that's going to change completely the surroundings of the cathedral. It's going to be greener. It's going to be more beautiful in many ways. The park's going to be linked together. The Seine River, which is almost invisible from the parvis of Notre-Dame, is going to be connected to it. And there's going to be underneath where once there was a huge giant parking, it's going to transform into a facilities for tourists and for visitors with, all sorts of facilities that have been missing for the past probably hundreds of years. So we're very excited about this project. As I said, it started already. We've had a public presentation at that project. I think the island is going to be looking completely different. But, when I see this presentation, and by the way, if people are coming to Paris, they should definitely go to the Carnavalet Museum. We saw somebody presenting from that museum, the History of Paris Museum. It's extremely interesting what they can show. You could see the gates and the walls surrounding the island. You could also see it was much more densely populated. And as a mayor, I've been wishing that so many destruction had, in the 19th century, Haussmann had a pretty heavy hand.
This was the interior minister in the late 19th century.
Yes. And, he's the one who opened a lot of the large avenues in Paris, but he also destroyed a tremendous numbers of homes, of churches also. There were many churches on the island. And he pretty much emptied the city from its inhabitants. There are still inhabitants on both sides of the island. But as a mayor, I'm looking for any opportunity to put back inhabitants on the island. And we have several projects, including the restoration of the hospital, the Hôtel Dieu, that has been there on the island for centuries, but changed sites and would change locations a few times. But that's another story.
Yeah, and further along, you have the old central courts of Paris. Ariel Vele, that brings us to another point. Getting rid of the cars, making it greener, it's going to attract yet more tourists. And, since COVID has subsided, we've had kind of backlash against tourism in a lot of cities, saying there's too many people showing up from abroad and it's too much to handle. Airbnb prices are raising rents for people, making it harder to find places to live. Making it greener, do you fear that there could be kind of a boomerang effect associated with that?
No, I don't think so, because one of the methodologies that we follow is we try to, tourists are great, and you're right, we don't want over-tourism. We're trying to make a lot of other places in Paris and in France attractive. There are so many places that are attractive. You could see that during the Olympics. But we're also trying to associate the inhabitants and salespeople around the island to all the decisions that we make. And broadly, they've strongly supported having fewer cars, being able to breathe. In fact, in the jury that chose the project that you just showed earlier on, that greener project, we included several local associations. So when we build projects, we always do them with very local people. I think that's the good recipe, right? We welcome tourists from all over the world, but we build projects with locals.
You're across the river on the left bank. Your shop is
Yes.
the Abbey Bookshop. Brian Spence. How's the? I mean, it's what, five blocks away from Notre-Dame, roughly, about.
If that. Yeah.
How has the neighborhood changed in 5 years?
There's been an increase in tourism, and I can't complain. It's been good for booksellers, as you can imagine. And one of the wonderful things about Paris is that it's a city that's not dependent on tourism, and I think it can swallow up even more tourists. What concerns me more is herds of tourists coming around, 80 at a time in some cases, silently walking through the streets with their headphones on, listening to the guide who's leading them. I think that the city should consider having a limit to the number of people in these sorts of herds, and Mr. Weil might be able to tell us if there's any progress in that respect. That's the only thing that I find sort of disconcerting about the tourism now. It's not so much the numbers itself, but the masses of tourism. Groups of 30.
Wait, what's the problem if it's a lot of people, whether they're in a group or not?
The difference is that people in a group are really not paying attention to their environment in the same way. They are moving with their group, talking with their friends, or listening to the guide is saying on his radio, and they, I think, are just less involved in the neighborhood and less involved even in the historical importance of what they're seeing. And I think that they tend to sort of dominate the sidewalks and the streets in a way that can be sometimes really uncomfortable, if not awkward, for other people just trying to get about their daily lives.
Yeah, sidewalks which are narrow in the heart of Paris. Ariel Weil, is there your reaction to what Brian just said?
Yeah, no, I would agree with Brian. Also, massive tourism is not what we're looking for. We've already banned buses from the island a while ago. We're trying to do the same thing. We're a little bit struggling now and having strong discussions with the police, the head of police. We have a plan to really remove buses from the center of Paris. I'm not talking about public transportation. I'm talking about tourism buses. And we favor a smaller, more qualitative tourism. But as I said, we also are trying to, in any decision that we make, to take into consideration the interests of a local resident. I don't think any tourist in the world wants to visit an empty town where there are no longer people living there. And in fact, when I look at other capitals, I see that danger being looming close. So we're paying a lot of attention to that. And we're working with local associations to prevent that. You mentioned, Brian, whether there are any limits. We haven't yet. We've been fighting very hard against Airbnb in general and sort of that kind of offerings, because they empty homes, they empty houses and buildings in the center of Paris, and we don't want that. There will be, as I understand, limits to how many people can enter the cathedral. I think there's a limit of 3,000. And in fact, now it'll be possible to book in advance so that, fewer people more scattered around the hours can enter the cathedral. Will be also in the way that we've designed, or actually the architect that we selected has designed the greener surroundings that you described. He's been very careful to have more trees, to have past lanes that will allow for people to also get quietness and be able to find peace and not just flock there as herds.
Yeah, the website for reservations for the first Sunday Mass, they were snapped up in a hurry and they had issues because there was so much demand on the first day. Agnès Poirier, your thoughts. I want to get back to Notre-Dame, but first on the neighborhood. How has that neighborhood changed? We saw at the report at the outset, remember the beginning of the rebuilding happened during the start of lockdown and COVID.
Well, I mean, the neighborhood, it really hasn't really changed, except that a lot of souvenir shops didn't have tourists anymore during the pandemic, for instance. But actually, the construction site, which is, quite an incredible site, I think a lot of Parisians will miss it because it's a sort of, especially at night, it's extraordinary. That beehive, that city within the city.
And these great panels on the side
Exactly.
explaining all the work they were doing.
And I know many people who actually went there. Just so Notre Dame being restored and rebuilt is still attracting the crowds. I do hope that the new plan, but this is not, this is the municipality, I think, the plan to sort of redesign the access to Notre Dame, which has only started and which Veil was actually talking about, especially using the car park underneath the parvis to greet the visitors will be a plus, because until then, as Parisians, you had to fight your way through the crowds, and we're talking about 15 million visitors a year, and that was almost impossible for Parisians to actually enter the cathedral. So hopefully they will go through that car park, a bit like the Louvre Museum, and that the parvis will find, it's medieval, non-medieval, because then it was busting with people, but, some quietness.
As you've heard, we're without a government right now here in France, but we do have an outgoing culture minister who put out the idea of charging money to get into Notre-Dame Cathedral.
Yes, and I really don't know what the problem is about this. You only have to go to Italy, and Italy being, a place where a lot of people practice their religion, as long as it is free for people who go to Mass, then what's the problem with charging a few euros for visitors?
Yeah, €5, I think they were.
5, 3, doesn't matter, because that would pay into the upkeep of all those buildings, and they desperately need, and the church is not paying for the upkeep. So that would resolve the equation, and everybody would be happy.
Just one final word. The fire has spared the cathedral's 18th century grand organ, its 8,000 pipes, but it had to be restored and cleansed of toxic dust, what with all the lead spread about by the blaze. At the nearby church of Saint-Étienne-du-Mont in the heart of Paris's Latin Quarter, Notre-Dame grand organist Thierry Esquèche practices his craft ahead of the opening.
Quite simply, it will be at least as beautiful as before because it has been cleaned. The pipes of this organ are a mixture of tin and lead, so you could imagine that some of the lead or tin might have melted, but it didn't. But it was full of dust and wax. That's been cleared away, so obviously it's going to shine again. Perhaps even more than before in the cathedral.
Peut-être encore plus qu'avant au sein de la cathédrale.
Bishop Riocreux, when you hear the organ on Sunday,
oh yes,
what will be your thoughts?
First, on Saturday, it will be the very special celebration. We call that the Réveil de l'Orgue, which is
the awakening.
Awakening, and it will be part of the celebration on Saturday.
What does that organ mean to you?
And Sunday it will be the High Mass with the consecration of the altar.
All right, we're looking forward to that. Bishop Riocreux, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Agnès Poirier, Brian Spence. I want to thank as well Mayor Ariel Veil for being with us. Thank you for joining us. Full coverage of the reopening of Notre-Dame on our channel and our website, France24.com.